The Patrik Laine to Montreal rumours just refuse to go away, so we're going to address them again on today's episode of Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So we got a squadcast for you today. The Patrik Laine to Montreal rumors just keep on coming. And they appear to be the front runner. They appear to be, it seems like the teams are really just kind of working things out. I don't think it's a done deal yet, but they certainly are the leaders of the pack right now. So we have got the wonderful Laura Saba and Ian Boisvert from Locked On Canadiens. And we're going to talk a little bit about Patrik Laine. We're going to talk about a trade. And we're also going to talk about rebuilds and where the teams are in their rebuilds, how do you do a good rebuild, things like that. So I'm just going to get right into my conversation with Laura and Ian.
100%. All right, let's talk about Patrik Laine. I think, first of all, we should start. Obviously, there's been a lot of rumors. I think the latest is Minnesota's interested or inquiring or something's going on. But there have been a lot of discussions about whether or not the Habs are interested, what it would take to get him, whether he would be a fit. So we thought we would start first with a Patrik Laine update. Obviously, he was in the player assistance program. What's been going on with Patrik Laine of late, Jay?
So, Patrik Laine has been activated from the NHLPA Player Assistance Program for, I think, a couple of weeks now. Not a lot of movement. He's down in Florida right now, he was previously training with some NFL guys, which is very funny for a variety of reasons. I think he's just kind of training by himself now. There's a trainer that works down there. So he's just kind of hanging out, getting strength back. He just recently, before leaving the program, had minor shoulder surgery, which, as I understand it, they basically went in and cleaned a bunch of junk out and debris that had been floating around in there. Nothing serious, just kind of cleaning it up in there. So that's not a worry. He's still a Blue Jacket. I remain unsure whether he will be a Blue Jacket in October on opening night, but I haven't fully committed to, he's definitely gone. Especially because it feels like the teams that are interested and the ask from the Blue Jackets seem to be changing by the day, if not by the hour.
Yeah, I think that's a key place to move to is we know that Patrik Laine wants a change of scenery. The Blue Jackets are willing to accommodate that change of scenery. What else are the Jackets hoping to accomplish with a deal like this? Is it more important for them to recoup assets? Is it more important for them to clear the totality of that salary? What would you think is number one on Don Waddell's list as far as accomplishments needed for this trade?
It's difficult to say because until free agency happened, all of the insiders and all of the buzz was they want a roster player in return for Laine. A lot of talk about Martin Necas and doing some kind of Laine for Necas trade, which obviously didn't end up materializing. And then the Blue Jackets get Sean Monahan in free agency, which I spoke to Laura about at length. We love Sean Monahan. And now the roster is looking pretty set. There's some holes there that I'm looking for younger players to make an impact this season. I'm looking for David Jiricek to be in the NHL full time. There's another hole on defense that I'm hoping is going to be filled by Denton Matejchuk as opposed to Jack Johnson, shall we say? But the forward core is pretty set right now. If they keep Laine, even if they do keep Laine, which again might still happen, it's still very crowded. So I don't know that like they don't. There's no such thing as too many centers in the league. I think we've learned that from experience. But I don't know that they want a roster player in return. In terms of salary, Don Waddell has said he doesn't want to eat half of it. So he doesn't want to retain 50% of the salary. I could go either way about this. Like, the Blue Jackets, as of right now, have almost $11 million in salary. And that's with everyone signed except Cole Sillinger, who is just coming off his entry-level contract. I expect will probably make about $3 million. So even once they've paid for him, that's still almost $8 million in cap space. So, like, even if they do retain 50% of Laine's salary, add another 4.3 on top of that, that's still, I can't do math on the fly. That's still, $12-ish million.
Yeah.
So the cap is not really an issue, I don't think. Laine is only under contract for 2 more seasons. There's no huge contracts coming up next summer that we have to worry about right now. So who knows? I know Don Waddell is not a fan of retaining salary typically. But if they end up retaining, 25%, 33%, or some weird percentage, because NHL GMs like to do that sometimes, I could see it. But in terms of return, if I had to stake, if I had to give my knee-jerk reaction, I would say middle pick and a B+, A- prospect, or, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, a late first round pick plus kind of probably a contract to make the money work, which is going to be interesting in Montreal's case, because I did take a quick look at your salary cap situation before this, and fitting Laine into that is going to be tricky, especially if Waddell doesn't want to retain 50%.
You mentioned the roster is set, and this is a thing I think it might be a bit hard to definitively say. Is it because the Blue Jackets just don't have a place for Patrik Laine? Is it just, what went wrong there? Is it just they're over the guy?
I think it was as far as I understand anyway, and obviously no one has kind of really spoken on this. He's been in the program for 6 months, nearly 7 months. And so I'm not really sure what to make of kind of the trade request. As far as the only official news that's out there is that Patrik Laine would like a fresh start. Now, what that means is anyone's guess. And I've kind of talked about it at length on Locked On Blue Jackets, so I won't go into too much detail here, but just to kind of rehash it a little bit, he made that request. This was pre-Waddell. This was pre-going into the program. Pascal Vincent was the head coach of the Blue Jackets. Jarmo Kekalainen was the GM of the Blue Jackets. He's come out of the program. Again, we don't know why he was in the program. I believe it was confirmed that it was mental health reasons, which, again, we don't know what those specific reasons are. There's a whole variety of mental health issues that could make someone go into the program or make someone want to go into the program. But the team is miserable. The team is losing a lot of games. He is not gelling with the coach's system. They're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and it's just not working. He has suffered some serious injuries over the past couple of seasons, which people don't realize how much that weighs on you mentally when you're injured all the time. And I'm not saying that Patrik Laine is injury prone. Habs fans that are listening, I'm not saying that, because a lot of it has been bad luck. And so, that plays into it as well. And also his father passed away very suddenly, I think 2 or 3 years ago now. And I think that has probably affected him as well. So when he made the request to be traded, he wasn't in a good place. And so I think it's less, I want to be away from Columbus specifically, more, I want to be somewhere else. He wants to go somewhere else. He doesn't want to leave Columbus, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I am less sure now. When he first came out of the program, I talked a little bit about, maybe his fresh start is Columbus, because new coach, new GM, new everything. Hopefully he's going to get to play the kind of role that Patrik Laine is kind of suited for, as opposed to the role that they were trying to shoehorn him into in the past couple of seasons. This could be his fresh start. And quite frankly, I've done this. I'm sure you guys have done this. We say things when we are in a bad place and when we're sad or whatever. And then, not to be flippant about it, but sometimes I make decisions and then I eat a green vegetable and I'm like, oh, I didn't actually mean that.
No, I've never once been emotional. It's never happened. No.
Right? Sometimes you make a decision and then you realize that you were in a kind of a bad place emotionally, mentally, whatever, when you made that decision. I don't think that he's going to come back and say, oh, I don't want to rescind my trade request, or I want to rescind my trade request. But I think a lot of people are looking at this as, oh, and someone else wants out of Columbus, who's surprised, blah, blah, blah. And it's simply not.
That's not
like,
what's
I'm scared
going
of this narrative, so I don't need to go into that because, frankly, I'm tired of giving it airspace. But it is what it is. Patrik Laine doesn't want to leave Columbus, but he wants to be somewhere else. Whether that somewhere else is, I've heard rumors about him going back to Winnipeg, which I don't know necessarily counts as a fresh start, but we'll see. Montreal has been very loud. Buffalo is another team I've heard. Minnesota is another team I've heard. The Islanders is another team I've heard. However, he is under the age of 30, so I don't know that Lou Lamoriello is interested in acquiring Patrik Laine. So we'll see what happens there. But I do want to make, just to kind of wrap up this very, very long answer that I've given. It wasn't anything that happened to him specifically in Columbus, and it wasn't Columbus being done with Laine. It wasn't that he quit on the team. It wasn't that he was miserable in Columbus specifically. He was miserable. He wanted to go somewhere else where he would potentially be less miserable. Maybe there were too many bad memories associated with Columbus right now. But Patrik Laine has always spoken glowingly about the city of Columbus, about the team, about the fan base. Like, he was their biggest supporter basically the entire time he was here. The one quote that I'm always going to think about, and I'm sure we'll move on in a second because I'm going a little bit long here, but it was a game against Winnipeg, either this season or last season, and he scored a goal, and they said, oh, now you've scored a goal against every team in the league except Columbus. And he said, oh, well, I hope that stays. I hope that I never score against Columbus because I want to stay here forever,
Oh, wow.
So it's not, this has never been about, oh, of course it's Columbus. No one wants to stay in Columbus. Sometimes you don't fit somewhere anymore, and that's no one's fault. It just is what it is. I think a lot of people are worried about kind of a Pierre-Luc Dubois 2.0. I think it's a completely different situation, and that's not to say that Pierre-Luc Dubois was in the wrong for asking out of Columbus either, but it's not.
It's not a comparable situation. Yeah, absolutely. It's just like, I think the similarity is just the two same teams were involved, right?
Right. But they were traded for each other, you know? Like, it was Laine for Dubois plus stuff.
But it was like, okay, people always want out of Winnipeg and people always want out of Columbus, and you had one player in each, right? So that was the thing. But when we come back, we're going to have a mock trade negotiation and see what value we can provide Columbus and what Columbus can provide for Montreal. But first, this episode is brought to you by Indeed. Hiring is honestly one of the worst parts of a job. It's so hard to find the right person. And if you make a mistake, if it's the wrong fit, then honestly, everything goes wrong. But what you have to do is search for better with Indeed, because you don't want to search, you want to match. And Indeed is here for you. If ever you need to hire, you need Indeed. The thing I like the most about it is it makes it so easy to find the right candidate for the position. There are so many qualifications that you can ask for. There's so much, and Indeed takes all of the guesswork, all the work out of it. All you have to do is say what you want, and there's so many businesses that have found their best fit, and you can do the same thing, because listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, let's get into our mock trade negotiation. I know that both of you have done a lot of research about this. So, Ian, let's talk about how badly we want Patrik Laine on the Habs.
For those not watching the YouTube, first of all, go subscribe to our YouTube channel, but I am wearing a Patrik Laine jersey right now. So if that's any indication of how badly I want this player to wear a Canadiens jersey, I mean, that's as good as it's going to get. So, I mean, Jay, you kind of set it up where the Blue Jackets, they really haven't tipped their hand as to what they want out of this trade negotiation, right? Like, the roster seems pretty set. They don't really have a need for anything in particular to help the Blue Jackets now. Is there an area that would make sense for them to add to this current lineup? I know, the match that I see with the Canadiens is Montreal has way too many young defensemen, which is a really good problem to have in a situation where you're trying to add goal scoring.
Yeah, so it's weird because the Blue Jackets are in a similar-ish situation, and I think this is something we're going to talk about in a little bit when we talk about rebuilds. The Blue Jackets' defense situation is very, very similar to Montreal. They're just a season, maybe 2 seasons behind, So I would love to sit here and be like, hey, let's do Patrik Laine for Lane Hutson 1-for-1 and call it a day. And obviously that's not happening. But even if you look at someone like a Caden Gooley, for example, the Blue Jackets, he is basically a step above where a lot of the Blue Jackets young defensemen are. So it is just it's going to create the same logjam down the road that they're already kind of seeing in Montreal. So unless it is a prospect that blows them away, and they sit here and they're like, yeah, let's get Lane Hutson, let's get David Reinbacher. I don't see that happening. Unless the defense situation I could see is if they take on someone like a Jordan Harris, for example, who is only under contract for 1 more season, doesn't make a ton of money, could potentially be a decent depth add. I talked a little bit there about potentially Columbus having a hole on the left side. That will hopefully be filled by Denton Matejchuk, but if he's not ready, do they bring in another defenseman a little bit further down the road, give him a little bit more time to develop without the Blue Jackets having to resort to icing Jack Johnson and Eric Branson at the same time? So young defenseman is intriguing, but I don't know that it works. In terms of current roster, the Blue Jackets are weirdly weak on right wing, or not weirdly weak, but a lot of their right wing players are on the younger side. So again, if you can get not necessarily a veteran, but someone who is maybe 28, 29, has another couple of years on until your players like your Gavin Brindley, etc., are ready to contribute full time.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Jordan Harris because I have his name written down, and it's not because I want to get rid of this player. Laura and I have both said that we adore this player. Not only the player, the way that he carries himself on the ice, but one of the more mature prospects the Canadiens have from a personality standpoint. He's
got a good head on his shoulders.
Absolutely, he's the kind of kid who his parents are proud of him. That they're proud of the way that he turned out. But you mentioned right wing potentially as a fit. What about a guy who plays right wing and at one time played in Columbus?
No,
Josh Anderson.
I knew you were going to say that.
Did you know that was coming?
Taunting me about this. Listen, I love big Josh Anderson. Laura and I used to, every time we did a crossover, we would schedule in some talking about Josh Anderson time. I love him. I love him not on my team. I love watching him skate around like he is a monster truck that has had its brake lines cut.
Which he does really once a year now. He does that game 1 against Toronto, and then we really don't see it for a while, unfortunately. I mean, if Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton could turn Josh Anderson into Patrik Laine, I think I would start building a statue of them in my front yard. That I know that's not going to happen. But
the thing is, Jarmo Kekalainen probably would have made that trade, and that's why again it's interesting to kind of try to predict Because Yama had his guys that he liked. You
Right.
know, you saw how quickly those guys left when Kekalainen wasn't in charge anymore. Emil Bemstrom was the big one. You know, he had been clinging to a roster spot by the skin of his fingernails. 2 weeks after Kekalainen goes, he gets traded to Pittsburgh. See ya. I don't recall saying good luck, etc. It's interesting now because with Don Waddell in charge, I have no idea what he thinks this team is missing and what he wants to add to this team. You know, there was a lot of talk about, Martin Necas is going to be the return because Waddell loves his Carolina guys. You know, look for them to add a Carolina guy in free agency or in a trade or whatever. People will say, well, will Teuvo Teravainen go to Columbus in free agency? Blah blah blah. All of this kind of, you know, because that's just kind of how hockey works. You know, guys love their guys, and I get it. I also feel that way. You know.
So who's the guy that loves Josh Anderson? That's just normal. Like guys,
I think he works in Los Angeles now. I think that's the guy who loves Josh Anderson.
I think Kent Hughes should be giving LA a call. Hopefully Mark Bergevin's the one that picks up the phone.
Well, but Mark Bergevin apparently in line for the Columbus job.
Didn't get it.
Thank God.
Count your blessings.
We don't need to talk about that. That would have been a really sad crossover to do.
We haven't settled that. We're running out of time. We haven't settled on a return. So we're getting Patrik Laine with no picks or prospects thrown in. Let's say it's 1-for-1 the salary. Not 1-for-1. Sorry, it's not a 1-for-1 deal, but Montreal's taking all of that salary on. They're going to figure it out. Who does Columbus get in return?
So I looked at this on Locked On Blue Jackets last week, and I had kind of settled on, because again, the salary is kind of a big thing, because I don't think the Blue Jackets are going to want to take any salary back, but the Canadiens only have about $4.5 million right now. So
currently,
the best I kind of came
Josh
up
Anderson
with
is still on the team. So in my scenario, he's gone somewhere. I don't know. I don't know where.
He just left.
He left.
But it's gonna be interesting. The what I came up with, I believe, was I started at Philip Masha because I had a quick chat with Scott and was like, which prospects are untouchable? Because then I won't waste my time trying to argue my way into getting like a David Reinbacher, for example.
Or Lane Hudson.
Or a guy like Joshua Roy, for example. Who was a guy that I would take in a heartbeat. Owen Beck was someone else that Scott listed as untouchable, which annoyed me because I would take Owen Beck in a heartbeat.
I wouldn't say he's necessarily untouchable. I think the problem is they don't have anyone that could be that good at third or fourth center. Yeah. But
he's a guy. It's an important guy. You can't have first line skill guys on all of your lines.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need an Owen Beck, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I looked at Philip Masha. I looked at potentially a pick. I looked at let me pull up the name of the goalie real quick. Quentin Miller was the guy that I looked at, who's very good in the QMJHL this season. And the Blue Jackets could always use another goalie prospect. So that was kind of where I landed.
Jacob Fowler is the only one who's
Jacob Fowler was the untouchable goalie prospect, because again, that would have been, I would have taken Jacob Fowler for Laine 1-for-1 and called it a day. You know? So that's kind of where I landed, was Masha, Miller, potentially a pick depending on level of salary retention. And I was kind of working on this with the understanding of like the Blue Jackets are probably going to retain 50% ish. So $4.35 million of Laine goes to your cap, and then we get Masha, Miller, and I'd like a second, but would take like a conditional second that is probably going to be a third that turns into a second if Laine scores 30 goals this season, for example.
So Ian, is the Habs GM in this scenario, are you accepting that?
It's like right on the border of yes and no, which means it's probably fair value, right? Like the fact that I'm like, I kind of like Philip Masha, but at the same time, I'm like, if you wanted to get a guy like Patrik Laine, and
you got to give up, you know.
Right. You have to give to get. And this is why the Canadiens have amassed all of these assets, right? Is to then cash in and get a player like Patrik Laine. The problem is we don't know what version of Patrik Laine we'll get, unfortunately. I think after some hand-wringing for most of the month of August, I would probably pull the trigger on a deal like that. Laura, I don't know about you.
I think it's key that you said like the month of August. I feel like if it gets close to it and Columbus really, really wants to trade the player, or he really, really wants out, and there's no way that he's going to be happy to, even start the season or training camp. I also think, the Canadiens, they start off somewhere and then they kind of talk themselves into things sometimes, like usually in a good way. So I do feel I feel like if nobody else bites, if no other trade works out, if the other, like when we were talking about Natchez and then he ended up getting signed, all of that kind of stuff, if all the other dominoes kind of just melt away, then this is the last one to fall. And I feel like that would be fair. But speaking of fairness, or not fairness,
the thing about a good trade, I have one last thing, is the thing about a good trade is that no one's happy.
Yeah.
Right.
If both sides are equally mad about the trade, it's probably a good trade.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Completely agreed.
It's not an outright fleecing, right? And that's the thing. And we are going to talk about the two rebuilds, compare it a little bit, see, where each team is at, and that's coming up in just a moment here on Locked On Canadiens and Locked On Blue Jackets. But first, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. I love baseball. I love going to baseball games in the summer. I love doing road trips, but it's always hard to get tickets until I discovered Game Time. Let me tell you about Game Time. They have last-minute deals. They have flash deals. They have zone deals for any event in your area, whether it's a sports thing, a concert, comedy, theater, all kinds of stuff. They have all-in pricing, which for me, I think is my favorite thing, is that you aren't getting all these hidden fees. It's literally all-in pricing. Price you see is the price that you are going to get. You can also preview your seats from the app. It makes it so easy to get exactly what you want for a great deal, last minute or not. And they have just so many events on there. It's not going to be hard for you to find what you want to go to. So you can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or any kind of tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right. I often look at the Columbus Blue Jackets and I think about how much further along they would be in their rebuild if Yarmo hadn't been there for as long as he was. So we want to kind of turn our attention to how things are going. I feel like in the draft, they haven't done too terribly in the last few years. It just feels like, and again, like as a team that has like so many injuries that like kind of derails the entire season, like I feel like Columbus hasn't advanced as fast as we wanted to, but it's not a Buffalo treading water situation.
I got real close to being a Buffalo treading water situation for a minute there. I love Johnny Gaudreau. I love having him on the team. I love him as a player. This is not me saying anything contrary to that. Signing him in free agency that 2 summers ago was probably the worst thing they could have done at that time, because they had a plan. They were going through the rebuild. It was miserable. They had just finished drafting, I think, 5th overall. Was the year. It was the same summer that they got Kent Johnson at 5th overall and then Cole Sillinger at 12th. The rebuild was rebuilding, and it was going to be miserable and it was going to suck. And then Johnny Gaudreau wanted to come to Columbus. And then that changed a lot of things, I think. And this was my biggest criticism of Patrik Laine at the end there, was he got impatient. That's what you saw with, not necessarily with the Gaudreau signing, but I think that was kind of the beginning of, we're giving Gaudreau all of this money. Now we need to be competitive. So Gaudreau's first season, miserable. Everyone was injured. Everyone. The only 2 players that played 80 or more games were Johnny Gaudreau and Andrew Peeke. You know, there was a times in the lineup where they were icing 4 guys playing their first NHL game, Andrew Peeke and Eric Branson. That was their defense core.
Yeah.
You know, there was a game where they played the Stars, and all of their players together on defense had played fewer games than Ryan Suter had total. And that was including Eric Branson's 600 and whatever games. Like,
Wow.
that's how bad it was Gaudreau's first season. They took all of the wrong lessons from this. They decided we need to get bigger and heavier and more durable on defense. They went out and signed Damon Severson to $1 bajillion for the next 8 years. They went out and picked up Ivan Provorov for God only knows what reason, where he proceeded to be a complete defensive liability, which everyone saw coming, right? So it really just kind of they got stuck at that very, very end of the end of the beginning of the rebuild, if that makes sense. You know, they tore everything down. It was great. You know, Foligno left, which caused everyone to be very upset for a long time, which makes sense. You know, a lot of their older guys left. It was Boone Jenner, it was Zach Werenski, and babies, you know? And they've kind of been stuck there for a couple of seasons. They've been drafting, you know, they drafted 4th overall this year. They drafted 3rd the year before that. The year before that, they overachieved and drafted, I believe the 12th overall pick was their original pick. They had the 6th overall pick because of that Chicago Seth Jones trade. And then the year before that, they drafted 5th overall was their pick. So, you know, 3 top 5 picks out of the last 4 seasons, but they haven't been getting any better because they just got stuck in this cycle of trying to rush the rebuild, trying to quote unquote retool on the fly, despite the fact that it clearly wasn't working. So,
can I just say something? Retooling on the fly. Has it ever worked? Like,
no,
it's
never worked. I was going to say it's never worked once.
But it might work for us. You know, like that, and that's just kind of NHL GMing in a nutshell. It's never worked for anyone else, but what if it works for us? Looking directly at the Edmonton Oilers, you know? Not to throw too much shade to another Canadian team, but I stand by it. You know, we've seen what that's like, and they tried to do that and it failed. And now it finally feels like they're taking steps. They were miserable to watch last season, but less miserable than the season before, you know? Guys took steps forward. The young players got a year older. We didn't have 3 season-ending injuries in the first 13 games of the season like they did the year before. Like, I'm not exaggerating. By middle of November, we'd lost 3 guys for the season.
3 important guys. And I feel like
it was
like a crossover around that time.
Jake Bean, and it was just a Danforth. Who is kind of like he's kind of an Owen Beck type. But again, you need those guys, you know?
Right.
So what I'm looking for this season is I would like them to be fun bad. Kind of like the Canadiens were kind of the last couple of seasons, where they're not contending, but they don't make you want to claw your eyes out every single time you turn the game on, which is kind of what the Blue Jackets have been.
Yeah, just get a better power play, and you guys will have a great time.
Yeah.
Listen. we don't have time to talk about how much I want the Blue Jackets power play to be better than Legally Dead.
I think that's the thing. Like, there are a lot of similarities in that respect because they've got a lot of fun young players. It's just like you look at it and it's like a couple of veterans and then just a bunch of babies, right? Like, nobody really knows exactly what they're going to grow into yet.
Right, and even the adults are like Nick Suzuki.
Yeah.
Nick
Suzuki is one of the dads of the team. Yeah.
Zach Werenski is not an adult.
There you
know?
go.
Erica Branson and children in Columbus, in the same way it's kind of David Savard and children
pretty much
in Montreal.
And so, like, I think the one thing that I do think is markedly different with the Montreal Canadiens is the fact that they aren't doing that. There's no like retooling, there's no rushing. There's just like, we're gonna embrace this, right? Like, injuries. Yeah.
And the same way that the Sharks have done. The Sharks have done a brilliant job with their rebuild so far.
Yes.
They committed to the bit so hard. They were the worst NHL team for 30 years, you know?
Literally. And so I think like with the Canadiens, it's more like we're not going to rush it. We're not, you know, if the focus seems very much to be on individual development right now because they can afford to be bad, right? And the thing is, like, when you're fun bad, it's great because that means that you're watching these young players show promise, right? You're watching them do things they shouldn't really be doing against teams that are much bigger, better, more mature, like more Stanley Cup contenders, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, I think that's the biggest difference is they're not trying to hold on to this idea. They're just like, we're just going to be patient. Everybody else is going to have to get with that program, right? We're not sacrificing years of contention for like flashes in the pan. And that to me has been the biggest thing. But there are a lot of similarities in that injury luck has been terrible for the Montreal Canadiens. Like the special teams have been really, really tough for both teams. Like you're watching certain players and you're wondering, like, are they going to advance in this kind of environment where like they're not playing like with the best possible line mates, etc. You're thinking about who can they move out for cap space or which veterans can they move out to make way for some young people. So like there is a little bit of that as well. But like I feel like Columbus seems to have a little bit less, I don't want to use the word dead weight, but I think I can, like given that, you know, if you look at RIP cap friendly, if you look at the Canadiens, whatever replacement Puckpedia page, like there's dead weight on there. I'm not going to name any names, but we, you know, there are some large glaring, I guess, holes in the lineup that are currently filled with human beings.
Corpses,
yeah. So I'm so mean right now. But yeah, so like I think to me, like that's a similarity, like that's an experience we've both kind of shared like this past season, like whenever we've like done crossovers and stuff, we've I think lamented the same things. But my question to you, Jay, is this: like in Montreal, and I think Ian, you'll agree as well, we have so much hope right now. Like it's such a hopeful time, like with the Demidov pick, I think as well, like that really took it to the next level because there were a lot of question marks before. Like people were remaining cautiously optimistic, and now they're just like throwing all of that. They're throwing caution to the wind. They're like, I am going to live and die by this team now. So how does it feel in Columbus? Like, what's the fan mood now that there's been like a front office change after a couple of years of kind of dangerously close to treading water?
The vibes in Columbus feel pretty good. There's still a lot of, and I've been preaching this on my show all summer long, is this summer we are tempering our expectations because last summer I went all in on optimism and then the Columbus Blue Jackets peed all over that and threw it in the dumpster by Canadian Thanksgiving. So, and I'm not exaggerating with the timeline of that. So Demidov is interesting. Demidov is your Fantilli, I think. He shouldn't have dropped to 5 in the same way that Fantilli shouldn't have dropped to 3. And as soon as they picked Fantilli, that's when it kind of started to change. Was, this player is the future. He could be very different franchises, very different franchise histories. There's a very real chance Adam Fantilli is the best player that has ever been in Columbus, you know, by the end of his career. I'm not saying that Ivan Demidov is going to be the best Montreal Canadien that has ever been. You guys have so much more history and so many more, like, the Mount Rushmore of the hockey players could be 4 Montreal Canadiens. I don't think anyone would argue too hard about that. Yeah. Some people probably would, but, you know.
And those people would be wrong. Unless Bobby is the only allowance I'm making. Like, that's the only allowance.
But like you see where I'm getting at with this is you could, like, the Demidov pick, you could almost see everyone in Montreal had resigned themselves to Beckett Seneca at 5th overall. I had been needling Scott about it for weeks because that's the kind of person I am. But Demidov forced you guys. I'm thrilled that we got Lindstrom. I don't think Demidov would have fit into the plan that the Blue Jackets are building right now. I think Lindstrom is perfect for that, but you can see it's a very similar vibe in Columbus as in Montreal based on Fantilli versus the Demidov pick. Yeah. Very different players, but there was a similar kind of bump. And like you said, the new GM, the new regime, all of these players as well are a year older. You know, we're getting another year older Ken Johnson, another year older Cole Sillinger, another year older Adam Fantilli, Kirill Marchenko, like Igor Chidakov. I wouldn't be surprised if Chidakov scores 30 goals this season. You know, all of these players are getting a year older. They're taking a step forward. Weirdly, I do still think that Montreal is ahead in the rebuild by like a season or so. So I'm going to be really interested to watch Montreal this season, because what you guys do this season is kind of what I'm expecting for the Blue Jackets next season.
And I think it's very telling that you say that. And I think it definitely, there's part of it is luck, but also part of it is just commitment to the bit, like we mentioned before.
Listen, I love to commit to a bit.
And so do the Montreal Canadiens,
Blue
apparently.
fans know this about me. Laura definitely knows this about me. Like, I've never met a bit that I haven't wanted to overcommit to until it's dead. You know, you've got to commit to it. You've got to commit to setting the bit on fire. The Montreal Canadiens went from a Stanley Cup final to first overall. That's how hard they committed.
I absolutely wholeheartely agree. Ian, any parting thoughts real quick?
Yeah, I mean, just I'll leave on the Demidov point that you made. It was an organizational exhale, right? Like, we were so in our own heads and just on pins and needles waiting for that pick. Celine walked out there, and immediately I was like, yeah, they're going to make the right pick. They're not saddling her with an organizationally bad decision. So, like, once that pick was made, I feel like everybody in this fan base just exhaled, and we're like, okay, this team could actually do something great. We just have to wait now. So, and to your point,
the consensus best pick. Sorry to interrupt, but and I'm not saying anything about these players specifically, but after the Twitter drama of David Reinbacher going 5th overall the previous season, the season before that, obviously there was the Slavkovsky right drama debate that I think you guys are finally starting to see some returns on in terms of Slavkovsky. But if you had gone away and, back-to-back years of David Reinbacher, and again, I'm just going to use Beckett Seneca, no offense to the kid, but if you'd gone away with those two players back-to-back 5th overall, Montreal would have burned the Bell Center to the ground.
Yeah, we needed a fan win, and this was a win for us. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and you got slam dunk.
So shout out to Kent Hughes. And that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, no episode tomorrow because we're on 3 episodes a week. Friday, we are going to be talking about Adam Fantilli is the plan and what his development should look like this season. So make sure you tune in for that. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTEI. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jacket. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.